Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, the brand new Castlevania Chapter, and the arrival of Count Dracula and Trevor Belmont into the fog. So, let me start off by saying here that I didn't know what to expect from Castlevania because unlike most licenses I've been around for, I genuinely had no experience at all with the property. Even more so than Alan Wake, I didn't know what to expect from the chapter because not only have I never engaged with the media before, I didn't even know where to start. There's so much of it, 28 games if we include the Lords of Shadow series, and much of it can be pretty hard to access because Konami's approach to their old games is similar to those guys from The Mummy. They buried that shit for a reason, and if you dare go near that grave with a shovel, it doesn't matter who you are. They'll run in with a sword and cut your head off. Or at least their lawyers will. As such, I was a little bit worried this would just be another licensed chapter that didn't work for me, like Chucky, Alien and Wesker. But I'm glad to say that despite me not caring for the source material, I'm genuinely, seriously impressed by the contents of this chapter. I don't think this chapter has made me a Castlevania fan per se, but that's the beauty of it. It's a licensed chapter that, for a variety of reasons, you don't have to be a hardcore fan of the series to be able to fully appreciate. And by the sounds of the Castlevania fans I've spoken to about it, this hasn't come at the cost of the DLC's quality for the people who do love it. I want to start here by covering Dead by Daylight's lore for the big man himself, Big Daddy Vladdy Count Dracula, known in DBD as the Dark Lord. Castlevania's version of Dracula started out as Matthias Kronqvist, an ordinary man in 1094, who sought mastery of the dark powers after he lost his wife Elizabeth. This longing drove him to the Crimson Stone, an artifact of immense magical power. Matthias used the stone and was reborn as the vampire Vlad Tepes, better known as Count Dracula, after he manipulated his noble friend Leon Belmont into killing the vampire Walter Bernhardt and sealing his soul into the Crimson Stone. And this act of betrayal and trickery led Belmont to swear himself and his family to a long-standing oath. Take vengeance on Leon's own departed wife, set right what Matthias ruined, and kill Dracula once and for all. Incidentally, Matthias in Lament of Innocence was voiced by Crispin Freeman, who came back to voice Dracula in Dead by Daylight, which is a nice touch that adds a second Overwatch alumnus to the fog. The Oath of Vengeance continued throughout almost a millennium of battle between Dracula and the Belmont family, with Dracula repeatedly attempting to conquer the world with the armies of hell at his command, only to be pushed back every time by a Belmont, often with the help of his own renegade son Alucard. His final death comes in 1999, when the forces of the world united with the aid of Alucard and Julius Belmont in the Demon Castle War that we've never actually seen, despite it being, in theory, the final death of Count Dracula. Dead by Daylight's lore for Dracula picks him up at the climax of this war, when Julius Belmont is finally killing him for good. Except this time around, fate has other plans for Vlad. A dark fog coils around Dracula, stealing away his shattered body into the gloom, and thus the entity claims Count Dracula for its own. I'll be completely honest with you, I'm a little underwhelmed by Dracula's lore. What we have here is pretty standard as far as licensed lore goes. The character is briefly established with some background details, a moment in their timeline is chosen as the moment the entity takes them, and it's just sort of left there. Konami are the license holders for Castlevania, and they've let Behaviour write more extensive lore for their characters before in the Silent Hill chapter. Cheryl Mason's entire adulthood got filled in and continued from the end of Silent Hill 3 in good detail. All this lore didn't exist before the DBD chapter hit, and I was hoping Konami would let Behaviour cook with their characters once again, but sadly it wasn't to be. The only thing that feels in any way original is the choice to pick Dracula up at the very end of his canon life, the Battle of 1999, which has never been covered in a Castlevania game before, and that we don't really know much about. It'd have been nice if the story had been our window into the heart of the conflict, to let us see Dracula when the chips were down and he was trapped like a rat. The lore we have isn't bad per se, it just represents to me a bit of a missed opportunity. The one upside for Castlevania fans though, is that nothing we're shown in Dracula's lore actually conflicts with Castlevania canon or suggests that this is an alternate universe. Remember, we've never seen the Battle of 1999 ourselves, and the only people who really know what happened, Alucard and Julius Belmont, haven't talked much about what happened that day. If you're a Castlevania fan and you want to treat DBD's lore for Dracula as his canonical final fate, there's nothing really stopping you from doing so. I'm not saying I do, I'm not saying you should, but given Julius and Alucard's silence on the matter in later games, there's nothing saying that you couldn't. And while that's strictly in the realm of fanon that I don't even believe myself, mind you, It's still a possibility I felt it was fair to suggest, if only because there's not really much else worth talking about from the point of view of Dracula's DBD lore. I'll talk about Trevor later because he's interesting to me for a whole different set of reasons, but Dracula's lore is especially disappointing for me given it came right after the D&D chapter, where Vecna was characterised really well and was expanded upon significantly as a resident of the Fog. Getting Dracula's lore right after Vecna felt like a bit of a step back, which is weird because in every other way, I think Dracula is an improvement over Vecna as a piece of an adaptation into Dead by Daylight. I'll go so far as to say that, lore aside, I believe the Castlevania chapter is the gold standard for licensed chapters going forward to shoot for. And at least to me, this came as a bit of a surprise. Despite heavy fan demand, Dead by Daylight has never had a vampire killer before. It was only a matter of time before we got one, but in terms of which vampire we'd get eventually, it was by no means a clear choice. For ages now, I thought we were getting an original vampire killer, this guy from the tomes. If it wasn't going to be him, there was so many possibilities for pop culture vampires to draft in as licensed characters. Count Orlok from Nosferatu, Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil Village, the von Karstein family from Warhammer Fantasy. According to behaviour, Strada von Zarovich from D&D was a leading candidate for the killer for that chapter, but got replaced by Vecna because Castlevania was bringing Dracula to the Fog. So when the chapter was revealed, the big question was, of all the Dracula homages, iterations and rip-offs throughout the history of vampire fiction, what made this one, Castlevania's Dracula, the right choice for Dead by Daylight? Well, if that's the question you guys want answered, then you might just be in luck. Because while I might not know much about basically anything, I do know vampires. I love vampires in fiction. I cannot get enough of that shit. Hell, I even drafted a university thesis about the evolution of vampire history, the history of the myth, and how it's reimagined in modern culture. I may be a dumbass, but I'm a vampire literate dumbass. So without further ado, let's sink our teeth in, shall we? Many pieces of modern vampire fiction seek to shake up what we'd expect from the archetypical vampire formula. Look at shows like True Blood or What We Do in the Shadows, that play with traditional vampire tropes in a generally self-aware fashion. But at least aesthetically, Castlevania doesn't tend to do this. It gets everything a child might say when you ask them what a vampire might be, and not only plays it straight, but turns it up to 11. A big, scary Eastern European nobleman in an opulent castle who wants to suck your blood and can turn into a bat. It's everything we've seen before, but Castlevania's not here to be subversive or artsy or even particularly clever. It's here to excite you into defeating Dracula and saving the world from his tyranny. It all fits with the game's context. They're action games, not horror games. And Dracula, being a fairly archetypical vampire, works for the kind of villain he is. He's not an intimate personal horror which might require, subtlety to pull off. He's the end of the world in a fancy cape. And it takes generations of humans dedicated to fighting evil to keep the figurative and literal wolf from the door. By examining the power, we can see this classic Dracula philosophy in action. The whole form-shifting power is the kind of thing that more or less any iteration of Dracula and almost any iteration of vampire could have featured. Transforming into animals, especially bats, is one of the oldest traits that classical vampires display, to the point that the idea of a blood-sucking undead that can take on new forms to help them do it is far older than the term vampire itself. Estries, for example, are female vampires that transform into creatures of the night like cats to seduce men and drink their blood, that have been part of Hebrew stories for centuries. And the Turkic Ubir was a version of that myth, where practitioners of black magic would rise from their graves after death as beasts, and take on human or animal forms as they hunted for blood in the night. It comes from a time period where vampires, ghouls and witches had a lot of overlap, to the point that in some cultures they were interchangeable. Cannibalistic forces of darkness and black magic that could transform into animals to hunt for prey in the night. The aristocratic vampire wasn't a thing until the early 19th century, when John Polidori's The Vampire released in 1819. Where the seducer Lord Ruthven would steal young women away from their families to drain their blood, and this predated Dracula by several decades. But while Polidori's work and other stories inspired by it elevated vampires from being ghouls crawling out of mud holes to noblemen hiding in their manors, it was Bram Stoker who gave the world Dracula, and laid the groundwork for what Castlevania did with the character. Lord Ruthven used his privilege and prestige to seduce, manipulate and charm, but Count Dracula was far more of a dark presence that loomed over the story. He projected a raw, terrifying power, a far cry from Polidori's Ruthven, who was largely just there to have a go at his contemporary Lord Byron, than the image of terror that Stoker would portray. The Baroque Gothic aesthetic of Castlevania is ripped more or less straight from Stoker's work, exaggerated with the impossible architecture of Dracula's castle, but still unmistakably classic. That's not to say that Castlevania's Dracula is a cut and paste of Stoker's though. Despite the aesthetic similarities to the classic portrayals of the character, Castlevania's Dracula is far from the idle rich that Stoker presents in the original book. Stoker's Dracula was content to vibe in his castle with his dog's body Renfield, his harem of vampire women, and whichever Transylvanian peasants he decided would be his personal sippy cup that night. But Dracula in Castlevania has far greater ambitions and uses the knowledge that comes from hundreds of years of study to help him get it. This version of Dracula is a practiced sorcerer and alchemist, with the armies of hell at his command, and whose castle is a marvel of magical engineering, capable of teleporting across the world. Castlevania's Dracula isn't content with mere lordship. He wants to take over or destroy the world, and he has the brutality, brilliance, and sheer raw power to do it. Narratively, he's more like the, Dark Lord Sauron than any traditional vampire. There's a decent argument to be made that this is a cultural thing, a result of an Eastern European story being reimagined by a Japanese game dev team. The original Dracula was based on the Romanian noble Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, known for his extreme cruelty as he impaled his victims alive on metal spikes. The closest Japanese analogue to a figure like this might be Oda Nobunaga, a Japanese daimyo largely responsible for the unification of Japan in the 16th century, only 100 years after the times of Vlad the Impaler. Nobunaga was renowned for two things, his military prowess and his merciless brutality, and he became known as the Demon King for his excesses in violence. Unlike another demonic samurai DVD players might be able to name, Nobunaga took this epithet in stride. Later representations of him in popular culture can treat him as more of a literal demonic force, at least when he's playing an antagonistic role. This appears to have filtered down into Castlevania's representation of Dracula. By the time of his death in 1999, he's honestly closer to the Antichrist than anything else, a representation of evil that stands directly opposed to God himself. Take the Baroque Gothic opulence of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the demonic representations of Nobunaga that we see in medias like Capcom's Onimusha games, boil 'em, mash 'em, stick 'em in a stew, and you've pretty much got Castlevania's Dracula. In every way, I think Dead by Daylight nailed that balance between the vampiric and demonic in Dracula's design and power. The animal transformation element is classic vampire, as I said before, but the hellfire zoning projectile beam thing is probably Dracula's most iconic attack from the game series, and due to the demonic influence absent in other Dracula figures, it's very unique to this iteration of Dracula. If I'm not a big Castlevania enthusiast, it might seem a little out of place, but it's sold well by the animations. Dracula is a regal lord of the undead, whose movements remind me a lot of Pinhead with his detached and effortless approach to wielding his power. His third-person animations do this even better, with his basic attack animation focusing on lightning speed and style over weight like most other killer's attacks, and the pickup where he grabs you by the throat feeling much more fitting to him than, say, Vecna or Xenomorph. His music is incredibly evocative of classic Castlevania soundtracks of old, with his chase theme and 16-meter terror radius especially being straight-up reconstructions of his boss theme from the first Castlevania game. His model design is taken straight from his appearance in Symphony of the Night, the best remembered Castlevania game among fans, and a major trendsetter for the Metroidvania subgenre, and in my opinion, it is the best model DVDs ever made. Vecna represented a step forward in detailed and expressive modelling for killers, but Dracula takes it up a notch. Even the Mori has its detractors, but I think it's pretty much perfect for him. Why would Dracula kill you in a graphic or gory fashion when you're far more useful to him as a mid-evening snack? But before I finish up with Big Man Vladimir and talk about the Survivor, I just want to draw attention to how well Behaviour has been able to control themselves with this release in a way that I don't think they always manage to do with licenses. Probably the most important part of a licensed chapter is getting the balance right between making the license feel faithful to the source material and ensuring that whatever's being added doesn't, ruin the game. While Behaviour generally adapt their licensed material with a great deal of faithfulness, This sometimes comes at the cost of how well the final product functions, and the best examples I can think of here are Chucky and RPD. Chucky developed a huge base of loyal fans that stuck with the killer for a while, in large part because his adaptation was almost completely seamless. Everything just works in a way that feels organically Chucky. But the power as a gameplay element was pretty much an abomination. Quite possibly one of the worst designed killer powers in the game's history until Palette Scamper was removed, and still creates issues to this day, because it turns out a 1 health state only dash on a 12-second cooldown with a killer with check spots is a hard thing to balance without making it feel unfair to play against. RPD was a similar case. It was a forensic recreation of the map as it was featured in the RE2 remake that was nevertheless a complete bitch to play the game on, and to some extent remained so even after it got split in half. That's not to say that this can't happen the other way around too. Nemesis and the Alien Chapter are both infamous examples of compromised adaptations of their unforgettable source material, but more often than not, behaviour tends to push the envelope in terms of what's healthy for the game in order to fully realise their vision for a licensed chapter. But Castlevania managed to make the best of both worlds, in a way that I don't think we've seen since, Pinhead. In my opinion, still our best licensed release ever. Behaviour knew that Dracula's castle was one of the most iconic images in the whole setting, but also knew that making a new indoor map for the castle would probably be awful to play on unless it was heavily compromised like Nostromo was, so they decided to make the castle a map detail instead, that spawns in the skyline over all outdoor original maps to bring the castle to life in the fog without needing to mess with the maps themselves. It's a very elegant atmospheric touch that doesn't impact gameplay at all, aside from survivors seeing it and breathing a sigh of relief and not playing it another fucking Huntress. Dracula players will be able to appreciate the castle in a lot of their matches without giving us an indoor map with a floor plan that would kill your average estate agent. But this balance between faithfulness and functionality starts to get a little bit messy once you look at the survivor, Trevor Belmont. Trevor is the main character of Castlevania 3. And despite being arguably overshadowed by his descendants Simon and Richter Belmont, Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, and Trevor's part in it has definitely aged well. Despite the DVD chapter explicitly being based off the game series and not the Netflix animated show, Trevor's appearance in that show was widely well regarded, and the choice of Trevor in DVD over Simon or Richter may have something to do with that. Like Dracula's lore, Trevor's is fairly brief, as it covers the events of Castlevania 3, where Trevor ventured out in 1476 to save the people of Wallachia from Dracula's rampage. But unlike Dracula's lore, Trevor seems to deviate pretty significantly from both the main Castlevania timeline and even the timeline of the Netflix show. In both the games and the show, Trevor ends up in a relationship with his travelling companion and fellow Castlevania 3 playable character, Cypher Belnades, who continues the Belmont lineage, but there's no mention of any of Trevor's companions in DBD's lore for him. No Cypher, no Alucard, not even Grant Dynasty, who was left on Netflix's cutting room floor. And unlike the mainline Trevor, who's widely accepted among the common folk once he vanquishes Dracula, or the Netflix Trevor who goes on subsequent adventures as he grows closer to Cypher, DBD's Trevor just sort of sods off into the wilderness ready to live his life in peace until he feels something lurking in the night. He wanders into the darkness, prepared to take on whatever the night has to throw at him, even Dracula itself if it comes to it. Before he realises the true nature of the evil in the fog, the entity claims Trevor Belmont for its own. Just like Dracula, I honestly think Trevor's lore for DBD is the weakest part of the character's inclusion. Not just because it's brief, but also because it doesn't seem to integrate it well into Castlevania's existing canon. I don't know how Castlevania fans feel about this, and truth be told, I don't understand it. Maybe it's a licensing issue where they didn't want to mess with Trevor's existing timeline, so they just wrote new stuff for him? Doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. But I'm not a big Castlevania buff, so if any of you lot know better than me, then please correct me in the comments. But beyond the questionable lore, I think Trevor is a great showcase of how a survivor from a licensed work that's styled differently from Dead by Daylight can be adapted into the game without breaking immersion. If you've been playing this game for a little while and gotten attached to its art style, you might find that Trevor looks a little bit strange. Compared to regular survivors who might have deep-set eyes or a layer of grime, his skin is weirdly clear and smooth. His clothes stand out massively from the regular modern clothing of most survivors, and he's rocking a snatched waist and broad shoulders combo that give him a frame closer to Nemesis than a normal survivor. This is probably meant to be a translation of his look in Curse of Darkness, and especially the manga associated with that game. The manga style with the smooth skin, broad shoulders and thin waist translate into a DBD model that looks a little bit strange, but I think in Trevor's case it works very well. Most male survivors tend towards similar body types. They mostly have square builds that can make their movement look very stiff. The only real outliers are Jeff, who's a bit rounder and bulkier than the others, and Hanato and Adam, who are a bit lankier. For the most part, most male survivors look the same, and it's a big reason as to why most of them aren't popular to play. Trevor is different. His more exaggerated proportions add a new level of stylization to Dead by Daylight Survivor roster that match up with the style choices made in the Castlevania series without breaking immersion with our game. And I suspect that Trevor, or more likely the Alucard skin that we know is coming for him, will be a very popular choice for male survivor players going forwards. His perks too are a great thematic fit for a vampire hunter who scours the world for treasure and weapons to fight back the evil. Exaltation is a thematic slam dunk. A big part of Castlevania is the collection of powerful ancestral weapons like the vampire killer whip that the Belmonts have passed down through the ages. And Exaltation more or less gives you the chance to make your own inside the trial itself. The more you fight back against the killer, the more powerful your weapons become against them. It's a super elegant piece of design that could only have really come in a chapter like Castlevania. Moment of Glory reminds me a lot of Hardened, a Lara Croft perk that I absolutely love for its thematic resonance. It follows the same basic idea. You go on a side quest that fits with the character in question, and the perk gives you a powerful benefit for it to represent your increased prowess and resilience from doing what's effectively level grinding. Just like Lara plunders resources and takes out traps to face her fears and become emotionally stronger for it, Trevor seeks out the weapons and secrets of those who came before him, and displays the unstoppable resolve of the hero he was always destined to be. And Eyes of Belmont seems, strange. Until you think of it kind of like Survivor Lethal Pursuer, Nemesis' perk that reveals survivors at the start of the trial and extends the duration of aura reading. It's meant to be a representation of the ultimate pursuer. He's in the trial with a mission to hunt you down and kill you, and he knows exactly where you are when it matters. Eyes of Belmont also has fixed aura reading and extended aura reading duration on the survivor end, which makes sense when you realise that if Nemesis was the pursuer of survivors, Trevor Belmont is the pursuer of killers. Evil cannot hide from him. He will track you down, and he will save the world from you. Trevor, much like Lara and the bards before him, has a very thematic range of perks that translate the ideas and systems from his home series fantastically into Dead by Daylight, but the part I can most appreciate about all of this is how none of it was inconsistent with DBD's tone. My litmus test for whether a feature from a license in Dead by Daylight feels like it belongs in the game is, if we lost the license, could the perk or mechanic or whatever be retooled into a generic equivalent without changing the theme, animations or sound design? For Trevor and Dracula's perks, hell the entire Castlevania chapter, I can safely say it would. And I'm only making a big deal out of this because of the last licensed chapter that we got. Astri and Bearmar represent the most immersion-breaking new inclusions in Dead by Daylight's roster, purely because the perks and character in general don't feel diegetic to the game. If a new original Survivor released today with perks that created magical illusions of survivors on generators, or summoned a loot out of their arse to bang out a tune with a deranged smile on their face, that would feel really weird. It would be immersion breaking. It only worked within D&D's context, and it really does show how not to do a non-horror licensed collaboration. Astri and Bearmar stumbled so that Trevor Belmont could sprint. Questionable lore choices aside, the Castlevania chapter is a sweeping success by every metric. It treats the fans of the series as several nostalgic trips down memory lane, while providing a fantastically integrated gameplay piece to newcomers who aren't familiar with the series. The perks are thematic smash hits, while Dracula's animations, sounds and power design condenses thousands of years of vampire storytelling and mixes it with Castlevania's particular spin on the old bloodsucker to turn this action game final boss into a killer worthy of the name. It's genuinely so funny how Konami and Capcom seem to be treating behaviour like a couple in divorce court, trying to win custody of their dog by rubbing salami on their hands. Konami gives behaviour Pyramid Head, and Capcom's like, well, Konami gave you one horror icon from their marquee horror franchise, so we're gonna give you two from ours. And then Konami's here one-upping them by giving them not just another killer, but one from a second franchise too, and letting behaviour work on Silent Ascension to boot. Maybe we'll get a new Capcom press release next month. Not only are we getting Jack Baker and Lady D as killers, they're canonically marrying Eric Pope and Jill Valentine, and they're sending paramilitary groups into Canada to invade it and install Remy Racine as the head of government, just to one-up Konami. I won't lie to you right now, the license fatigue is starting to set in pretty badly. Since 2023's anniversary chapter, we've only had 2 originals compared to 7 licensed releases, with 1 more original killer later this year and 2 more licenses confirmed for 2025. The solo licensed killer that's coming in March, and FNAF coming to Dead by Daylight for the 9th anniversary. At this point, I'm more excited for DBD's new originals than yet more licensed crossovers. But if we're going to be getting more licenses going forward, then Castlevania should be the benchmark. It did almost everything right. It manages to pack itself to the brim with homages and genuine care for the IP, without alienating DBD players who don't have a Castlevania background or breaking immersion with DBD's tone. It's a fantastic inclusion to the game, and Dracula will likely be a fan favourite killer for years to come. Oh, and that Alucard skin they've teased is gonna make absolute bank. Seriously, the Alucard mania is already wild, and he's not even here yet. The unfunniest, thirstiest people in the world are licking their lips and rubbing their hands together, preparing the most down horrific names that they can sneak past Steam's word filter. Mr. President, a second Sable has hit the building. Well, that's all I had to say about the Castlevania DLC. Sorry this video took so long, I've been really busy with stuff that you'll hopefully be seeing soon, except for one of those things that you can see right now. I made this entry for the DBD Community Cosmetic Competition featuring the Skull Merchant, surprising probably no one. I'm not exactly a skilled artist, but it was my first big project in years and I'm still quite proud of it. Got loads of cool things planned for the weeks to come, including a review of Tome 20 and a couple of projects I've been wanting to do for a really long time. So stick around, I hope you'll be impressed.